gremlins! Last week I made myself a pair of antlers in an effort to look more like the artist-sona I created when starting this channel, as well as to look more like a fairy creature. Working on that project got me thinking a lot about my artist-sona, so this week I decided to continue thinking about them by drawing a character reference sheet for how they look and dress. I also want to think of some lore to accompany this gremlin while I draw, to figure out what kind of world they fit into and who they are as a person. I've drawn character reference sheets before, but it's been a while. Most of the time, my version of a character reference sheet is a single drawing of the character's full body, maybe with a close-up of their head, and some information written about them beside the drawing. Today, though, I'm drawing this character from 4 different angles to show off the front, back, and both side views, something I haven't done before. The 2 primary versions of my artist-sona, who I'm just going to call green from here on out to avoid the mouthful, are my YouTube profile picture and the animation at the start of my digital art videos. I have drawn green a couple of times outside of that, for a short Instagram animation a few months ago and in the arcane art style, but I'm just using the first 2 drawings as my reference image. Green's proportions are a bit more cartoony than my regular way of drawing people, especially in the roundness of their head and the size of their eyes. I've decided to keep those cartoony proportions for the reference sheet. It's a stylistic choice I made for this character and I'm sticking to it. I'm drawing one full sketch of the character in front view first, then using that sketch to keep the proportions of the character the same for the back and the sides. Green's outfit is pretty simple, but there is a lot of detail in their accessories and body features that offset that simplicity, especially when I have to draw it repeatedly. If I animated Green to do more than just blink and move their arm, there are definitely details I'd simplify, especially their foliage crown. There's also one detail of Green's design that has been inconsistent before, their wings. When I first drew my profile picture, I gave Green dark, slightly tatted insect wings. However, they don't have visible wings in the channel animation. I did give them wings here though, I really like that detail, and I can always say that the wings are just folded up and invisible in the animation, or maybe they are magically retractable, like I often daydreamed about as a kid. Flipping the drawing to draw Green from the back was quite simple. The silhouette stays exactly the same. I just had to turn the face into the back of the head and draw the parts of the wings that had previously been hidden behind Green's body, but the only challenging part of this sketch was the hands. Hands are my weakness to draw, and figuring out how to flip the hands from the position I'd drawn before was a struggle. I kept holding my own hands up to a mirror, but it wasn't helping, and I'm not super happy with the end result I ended up with. I just couldn't figure out a way to make the hands look any better. Next, I copied my sketch again to work on the first side profile. I'm trying to make sure all the proportions are the same, but of course everything is rotated, so I'll need to redraw each detail. I've started with the head, and I'll end up tweaking the head proportions some more a lot later in the process. I also need to wrap my head around which side of the head would be shaved. I had to rotate Green in my mind to figure it out. I didn't even try to make the hands look like they are in the same position as the other angles, although I did still procrastinate and leave the hands for last. Finally, I flipped my side profile and drew the other side. I don't think I would normally do 2 side profiles for a character if I were to make another reference sheet like this, but because Green has an asymmetrical haircut, I felt like it was a good idea. Finally, the sketches were done and I got to start on the line art. I had a false start with the line art. I started with my normal thick outline around everything, but then decided that with the amount of detail in the head especially, the thick line made everything look clumsy. Instead, I'll keep the thickest line to outline the clothing with, and I'm using thinner lines around the head and face. Overall, I vary my line weights a lot. I think that the smallest brush I used was 5 or 6 points and the largest 20. Green has the same basic accessories since I designed them in 2022, although the original design had a few necklaces that I've since phased out. They have mismatched earrings, a small bone in one ear and a bird skull in the other. They also have 2 helix piercings in their ears, and their ears are pointed. They wear a plain black choker around their neck and a crown of foliage made up of mostly ferns and leaves with a few white and yellow flowers in the mix. At first I gave Green very red blush and white freckles, as I was at the time in a phase of giving myself much the same look, inspired by cottagecore TikTok videos. However, now Green's freckles are a more natural brown, and their blush minimal. Green's outfit is very simple, a dark t-shirt and green cargo pants with plenty of pockets to keep sketchbooks, pencils, rocks, and interesting shiny things in, and of course, snacks. They also have a simple leather belt and leather boots. Green's wings are based on cicada wings, which are the insect wings I generally use for fairy characters, when I don't give them moth wings. I also, finally, after years of looking up the same cicada wing reference pictures every time I draw them, think I understand how the wing segments work in simple terms. Figuring out lore for Green was a slightly complicated task. First and foremost, Green is me, or at least a version of me. I am Green. Of course, Green is also a fantasy creature, specifically a changeling. So how do I create lore for a version of myself? I know having an artist-sona is fairly common for artists, but I don't know if any of them have lore. I've decided to treat Green kind of like my many teenage self-insert OCs. Green is me, but in a very specific world and context, and I cosplay Green in the real world sometimes. Green has most of my personality and character traits, but with the extra spice of having mild magic and non-human features and living in a fantasy world. Green is, of course, an artist, and given that one of my primary methods of art is digital, Green must live in a fantasy world where digital art technology exists in some way. After all, one of their main canonical appearances is drawing on a simple drawing tablet. Green's clothing is also modern, not fantastical, so they must live in either an urban fantasy context or in an alternate fantasy world that has developed technology at a modern rate. I think I'll go with the second option. It's a bit more fun than being restrained by Earth. Green is an artist in this modern fantasy world. They primarily draw on a tablet powered by a magical crystal, which they can shrink down into their pocket and withdraw to work on art anywhere. As well as crystal drawing, they also like to paint with physical mediums, both on paper or canvas and on clothing. I might at some point give Green a few outfit variations to show off some clothing they've DIY'd, as DIYing clothing is also a huge part of my art. When not creating, Green consumes art that other people have made, spends lots of time being slightly feral in the woods around their city with their friends, collects all sorts of trinkets and oddities, and goes on adventures. Green's friends call themselves the Gremlins, as they are all different manners of fantasy creatures who create mild mischief and love being weird together. At some point, if my friends are amenable to it, I might create actual canonical fantasy character designs for the friends I keep mentioning on the channel, to be Green's adventure companions. Green does live in a city, but a fantasy city, with a castle in the center and building styles that are much more interesting than real-world cities. Green's home specifically is very Hobbit Hole-like. It's small and cozy with round doors and windows. There is moss on the floor and walls, and their bed is a nest of stuffed animals and blankets. The hall is cluttered with trinkets, and there is art all over the walls. I got started with the colouring by colouring the opaque edge of Green's wings on the back view of them, since the colour of those wings will overlap all the work below. Unlike the outlines where I went character by character, for the colouring stage I went colour by colour across all 4 angles. I started with the small detail colours in the jewellery and foliage crown. Green's colour palette is basically the exact same colour palette I live and breathe in real life. It's mostly green and black with some brown, and all the greens are foresty or earth tone greens. I don't actually own the outfit I've given Green, except the pants, which minus the patches are basically my everyday cargo pants. However, this outfit would fit exactly into my wardrobe, and knowing me, at some point I will be able to fully dress like Green. Not too far into the colouring process, I decided that something about Green's side profile just does not look right with me, and I did a bunch of tweaking to try and make their face look less flat. I'm not sure it totally worked, but I think it looks a lot better than it did. As a changeling, Green has some minor magical abilities. I mean, this is basically a self-insert character, I can't not give them some kind of powers. Primarily, Green is a minor shapeshifter. They can shapeshift small things about themselves, like their hair length and colour, eye colour, and the presence of their wings, without much effort. They can also shapeshift in larger ways to look completely different, or even into a less humanoid, more creaturey shape, but that kind of change puts a physical toll on Green's body, so they rarely do it. The ability to shapeshift means that Green's joints are a little too loose and bendy, and yes, this is a justification to give Green the same joint pain and disability that I have. They probably also use a cane part-time, but not as much as I use mine, since they have the benefit of wings when leg mobility is suboptimal. I finished the colouring with those wings, giving them a dark, semi-transparent membrane. Given that this is a character reference sheet and not a full illustration, I decided not to shade Green, beside giving them a bit of blush on the nose, cheeks, ears, elbows, and fingertips. Finally, I wrote Green's name, pronouns, and species in the corner of my canvas, and here is my artist-sona's official reference sheet. Now in the future, if I draw Green in various situations, I don't need to screenshot my intro animation to reference from, and I can have a full look at their outfit, unobscured by their crystal-powered tablet screen. This is a bit of a different video, but I had a lot of fun thinking about my artist-sona, so I hope you enjoyed it. I needed an easier video this week, and this drawing was excellent for that. I'll see you again in 2 weeks, and until then, bye!